You can't even balance a checkbook, my brother said, loud enough for the whole conference room to hear. Why are you even in this meeting? I didn't say anything. I just looked down at the legal pad in front of me, the one with nothing written on it but a single line I'd jotted before walking in. He thought my silence was embarrassment. He'd always thought that. For 31 years, my brother had read my quiet as weakness, and for 31 years, he'd been wrong in a way that was about to cost him everything he owned. His name was Travis, and that morning he was sitting at the head of a mahogany table in a downtown Cleveland office tower, surrounded by the board of the company our father had built, the company Travis had run into the ground over the last 6 years, while telling everyone it was thriving. He was wearing a watch that cost more than the median household income in our state. He'd flown in on a chartered jet for a meeting that could have been a phone call, and he had no idea, none, that the woman he'd just humiliated in front of 9 people was the reason his bank hadn't already foreclosed on him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand who we were before you understand what I did. I grew up the younger of 2 kids in Akron, Ohio. My dad started a manufacturing company in the 80s, hydraulic components, the kind of unglamorous business that quietly makes a fortune if you run it right. He ran it right. By the time Travis and I were teenagers, we lived in a big house with a circular driveway and a pool nobody used. And my father had developed a very particular theory about his children. Travis was the heir. I was the disappointment. It wasn't subtle. Travis was 3 years older, loud, charming in the way that works on adults and terrifies other kids. He played football. He shook hands like a politician. My father looked at him and saw a younger version of himself. And so everything got poured into Travis. The encouragement, the expectations, the assumption that one day the whole thing would be his. Me, I was quiet. I read a lot. I asked too many questions, and the questions made my father uncomfortable because I had a habit of asking the ones nobody wanted answered. When I was 11, I asked him at dinner why the numbers in the company's holiday newsletter didn't match the ones I'd seen on a paper in his study. He sent me to my room. My mother told me later, gently, that smart girls who couldn't keep their mouths shut ended up alone. That was the family I came from. The boy was the future. The girl was a liability to be managed until she could be married off to someone respectable. I want to tell you I rose above it through sheer confidence, but that's not true. For a long time, I believed them. I believed I was the slow one, the difficult one, the one who'd never amount to anything. When I told my father at 17 that I wanted to study finance, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Somehow that would have been easier. He laughed the way you laugh when a child says something charmingly absurd. "Sweetheart," he said, "leave the money to people who understand it." So I left. I got a partial scholarship to a state school he sneered at, and I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest because he wouldn't pay for what he called a waste. I waited tables until 2 in the morning and sat in accounting lectures at 8. I learned what a balance sheet actually was, the real thing, not the cleaned-up version in a holiday newsletter. I learned what it meant when a company's revenue grows, but its cash flow doesn't. I learned that the difference between rich people and people who used to be rich is almost always the same boring thing, and that boring thing became my entire life. Travis, meanwhile, was handed the company at 26 when our father's heart gave out. I came home for the funeral. I hadn't been back in 4 years. Travis hugged me at the service and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of." Like I was a stray dog he was deciding whether to keep. The will left him controlling interest in the company and the house. It left me a small lump sum and what the lawyer called, with a straight face, the contents of the garage. My father's last act on this earth was to make sure his daughter understood her place one final time. I took the lump sum. It wasn't much, but it was enough to do something nobody in my family ever imagined I'd do with it. I invested it. Not in stocks, not in anything flashy. I'd spent my 20s working at a small private credit firm, the kind that lends money to mid-sized companies when banks won't, and I had learned something most people never learn. The real power in the financial world isn't owning a thing, it's owning the debt on a thing. The person who lends you the money to buy your dream can take your dream away the second you stumble. I'd watched it happen a dozen times from my desk. I'd processed the paperwork. I knew exactly how the trap worked because I'd helped set it for other people. So I took my inheritance. I took the reputation I quietly built at that firm. I took 8 years of 14-hour days, and I started my own fund. We were small. We were specialized. We bought distressed corporate debt, the loans of companies in trouble, at a discount, and then we either helped them recover or we collected what we were owed. It is not glamorous work. You will not see a movie about it. But it is, dollar for dollar, one of the most powerful seats in American business because everybody owes somebody, and we were the somebody. My family knew none of this. I want to be clear about that because later they would claim I hid it from them maliciously. I didn't hide anything. I called. I emailed. The first Thanksgiving after I launched the fund, I tried to tell my mother what I was building, and she interrupted me to ask if I was seeing anyone, because a woman my age shouldn't put it off. I told Travis once, at a cousin's wedding, that I ran an investment firm, and he laughed and said, "What, like helping old ladies pick mutual funds?" and turned back to his beer. You can only knock on a door so many times before you accept it's never going to open. So I stopped knocking. I built my life. I built my firm. And I let them keep believing whatever made them comfortable, because their comfort had stopped being my problem a long time ago. 6 years passed. In those 6 years, my fund grew from a 2-person operation in a rented office to a firm managing several $100 million. And in those same 6 years, my brother took our father's company and slowly, confidently, drove it off a cliff. I didn't gloat about it. I didn't even enjoy it, not at first. He overexpanded. He took on a debt-fueled acquisition that any first-year analyst would have flagged. He spent company money like it was his personal allowance, the jet, the lake house, a failed restaurant venture he started because a buddy convinced him it would be fun. He fired the old guard, the engineers and managers my father had trusted, because they kept telling him things he didn't want to hear. And he replaced them with people who told him he was brilliant. I knew all of this because in my world, information travels. When a company starts struggling, the people who lended money start talking. And about 4 years in, I started hearing my father's company's name in those conversations. Then I started seeing its loans come up for sale. The first time one crossed my desk, I almost passed on it out of something like sentiment. It was a sizable chunk of debt, a credit line the company had drawn down heavily and was struggling to service, and the original lender wanted out. They were offering it at 60 cents on the dollar, which told me everything I needed to know about how scared the bank was. I sat with it for a week. I thought about my father laughing at the dinner table. I thought about that lawyer saying the contents of the garage. I thought about my mother telling me smart girls end up alone. Then I bought it. I didn't buy it to be cruel. I want you to understand that because it matters to me even now. I bought it because it was, objectively, a good distressed debt position, and because some part of me needed to own a piece of the thing that had been used to measure my worthlessness my entire life. I bought it through one of my fund's holding entities, a name on paper with no obvious connection to me, because that's simply how the business works. Nobody knew. Travis certainly didn't. And then the company kept getting worse, and more of its debt came up for sale, and I kept buying. I bought the credit line. I bought a chunk of the equipment financing. When the company missed payments on a piece of real estate, I bought that note too. Quietly, methodically, over almost 2 years, I accumulated position after position until one ordinary Tuesday I had my CFO run the numbers and confirm what I already knew in my bones. My fund was now the single largest creditor of my father's company. And critically, we held the senior secured debt, the loans backed by the company's actual hard assets, the buildings, the machinery, the real things. In the brutal hierarchy of who gets paid when a company collapses, I was now first in line, above the banks, above the suppliers, above everyone. I owned my brother's failure before he even knew he'd failed. The meeting that morning in Cleveland was supposed to be his salvation. Travis had finally run out of road. The company couldn't make its next round of debt payments, and he'd come to the table to do what desperate executives do: beg for more time, restructure the loans, find new money to plug the holes in the old money. His lawyers had set up a meeting with the company's major creditors to negotiate a lifeline. What he didn't know, what nobody had told him because the deal structure didn't require it, was that the largest creditor at that table, the one whose signature he needed most, was being represented by a managing director from a fund called Ashford Lane Capital. My fund. I almost didn't go in person. I usually send my team to these things. But I thought about it for 3 sleepless nights, and in the end I decided I owed it to the 11-year-old who got sent to her room for asking why the numbers didn't match. I owed it to the 17-year-old who got laughed at. I owed it to every version of me that had believed them. So I flew to Cleveland. And I walked into that conference room. Travis was already seated at the head of the table when I came in, holding court, telling some story to the lawyers about a fishing trip. He glanced up when the door opened, registered a woman in a charcoal suit he didn't recognize, and went right back to his story. My own lawyer pulled out a chair for me near the foot of the table, and I sat down quietly and opened my legal pad. It took Travis about 10 minutes to actually look at me. When he did, I watched it happen in stages. First, the flicker of recognition, then confusion, because his sister did not belong in a room like this. Then, settling over his face like a mask he'd worn his whole life, contempt. "Hold on," he said, cutting off one of the bankers mid-sentence. "What is she doing here?" He didn't say my name. He gestured at me the way you'd point out a typo. "This is a serious meeting. This is about the future of a company our father built." He turned to the room with a little laugh, inviting them in on it. "My sister can't even balance a checkbook. Why is she here?" That's when he said it, the line I told you about at the start. A few of the lawyers shifted in their seats. They didn't know who I was yet, but they knew you don't talk to a stranger in a creditors' meeting like that. I let the silence sit. I've learned that silence is the most expensive thing in any negotiation, and most people will pay almost anything to make it stop. Travis couldn't stand it. He filled it. "She showed up at our dad's funeral after 4 years of nothing," he told the room, warming up now, performing. "She's never run anything. She's never built anything. She thinks she works in finance." He made air quotes around the word, and he actually smiled at his own cleverness. "Last I heard, she was helping retirees pick mutual funds out of a strip mall, so I'd appreciate it if we could keep this meeting to the adults." One of his lawyers, a careful-looking man with gray at his temples, leaned over and whispered something in his ear. I saw Travis wave him off. That was the moment my own attorney, a woman I'd worked with for years, slid a folder across the table to the lead banker and said, in the flat tone she uses when she's about to end someone's day, "Before we continue, I think it would help everyone to understand who Ashford Lane Capital actually is." The banker opened the folder. I watched his eyes move down the first page. I watched him stop. I watched him look up at me, then at Travis, then back at me. "Mister," he started, addressing my brother, and then he changed his mind about how to say it. "Are you aware of who is sitting at the other end of this table?" Travis frowned. "My sister. What does that have to do with anything?" The gray-haired lawyer beside him had gone very still. He'd read the cap table. He understood before Travis did, the way the smart ones always do, and you could see him calculating how fast he could get out of the building. "Your sister," the banker said slowly, "is the managing partner of Ashford Lane Capital. Ashford Lane holds the senior secured debt on this company. They are your largest creditor." He paused. "By a wide margin." The room went quiet in a different way than before. The first silence had been Travis's silence, the comfortable quiet of a man pausing for effect. This silence belonged to everyone else, and it had weight. Travis laughed. It was reflexive. The laugh of a man whose entire model of the world has just taken a hit it can't absorb. That's not possible. She doesn't." He looked at me. For the first time in his life, I think he actually looked at me. "This is a joke. Did you set this up?" "I bought your debt, Travis," I said. They were the first words I'd spoken since I walked in. All of it. Over the last 2 years. The credit line you maxed out to fund the acquisition you were warned not to make. The note on the Brook Park facility. The equipment financing on the machines you let depreciate so you could afford the jet. I kept my voice even. I'd practiced keeping it even. I'm not here as your sister. I'm here as the person who holds the keys to everything you have left. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't, not exactly. What I felt was something quieter and stranger, like setting down a suitcase I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. Travis's face had gone from red to a kind of bloodless gray. "You can't do this," he said, and his voice cracked on the word do. "This company is our family. It's Dad's legacy. You'd really tear it apart out of, what, jealousy? Because you never fit in." And there it was. Even now, even cornered, his instinct was to make me the unstable one, the bitter one, the girl who couldn't let go. It was the oldest move in our family's playbook, and 6 years earlier it might have worked on me. "You missed 3 debt payments," I said. "You did that, not me. You diverted company funds to personal expenses, which I have documented. Because when you stop paying your senior creditor, that creditor gets to look at the books. All of them." I let that land. I'm not tearing anything apart, Travis. I'm collecting what I'm owed. That's all this is. It's just business. You taught me that, actually. You and Dad. You taught me that the only thing that matters is who holds the leverage. His lawyer finally spoke, very carefully. "What is it that Ashford Lane is proposing?" I opened my legal pad to the one line I'd written before the meeting. I'd thought a long time about whether to do the easy, vicious thing, to call the loans, force the company into liquidation, and walk out leaving nothing but a smoking crater where my brother's life had been. I could have. I had every legal right to. But somewhere in those 3 sleepless nights, I'd decided that wasn't who I wanted to be. Becoming my father in order to defeat my father seemed like a particularly stupid kind of loss. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "Ashford Lane is going to take control of the company, effective immediately, under the terms of the loan agreements your own lawyer signed. The senior management team is removed. That includes you, Travis." He started to interrupt and I held up one finger, the way my father used to do to me, and watched it stop him cold. "The company is salvageable. The bones are good, because Dad built it right before you got your hands on it. I'm going to bring back the engineers and managers you fired, the ones who actually know how it works. I'm going to recapitalize it with my fund's money, which means the 400 people who work here, the ones with mortgages and kids in school, get to keep their jobs. That matters to me, even if it never mattered to you." The gray-haired lawyer was nodding slowly, almost against his will. From a purely financial standpoint, it was the right move. He knew it. "As for you," I said, and I looked at my brother, really looked at him, the boy who'd been handed the world and dropped it. "You're going to resign. Quietly. You'll keep your dignity in the press release, which is more than you offered me at Dad's funeral. You'll vacate the executive office by end of week. The jet is a company asset, so that's gone. The lake house was bought with diverted company funds, so I'm afraid that's coming back to us too. You'll walk out of here with what's actually yours, which, after the personal guarantees you signed, isn't much. But it's more than nothing. It's more than the contents of a garage." I closed the legal pad. "I'm not doing this to destroy you, Travis. I could have. Believe me, I could have. I'm doing this because you and Dad spent my whole life telling me I didn't understand money. And it turns out I'm the only one in this family who ever did." He didn't have anything to say. For the first time since we were children, my brother had nothing to say to me. He sat there at the head of the table that was no longer his, in the chair that was no longer his, looking at his sister he'd never once bothered to actually see, and the silence this time was entirely his to keep. His lawyer began quietly gathering his papers. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and thanked the bankers for their time. I told my attorney I'd see her back at the hotel to sign the transfer documents. And then I walked out of the conference room and down the long hallway and into the elevator, and when the doors closed and I was finally alone, I leaned against the cold steel wall and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 11 years old. I'd love to tell you my mother called to apologize. She didn't. She called to ask how I could do this to my brother, how I could be so cold, whether I'd ever cared about family at all. I listened. I'd gotten good at listening. When she finished, I said, "Mom, I called you for 6 years. I tried to tell you who I was. You wanted to know if I was dating." There was a long silence on her end. "The offer stands if you ever actually want to know your daughter," I said. "But I'm done auditioning for a part in this family." Then I told her I loved her, because I did, in the complicated way you love people who never learned how to love you back, and I hung up. The company turned around within 18 months. The engineers came back. So did some of the old managers, who cried, a couple of them, when I told them they had their jobs again. We're profitable now, growing the right way, the boring way, the way that lasts. My father's name is still on the building. I left it there. He built something real once, before pride got the better of him, and I decided that part of him was worth keeping. Travis sells commercial real estate now, somewhere out west. We don't speak. I heard through a cousin that he tells people his sister stabbed him in the back, stole the family business, that I was always jealous of him. Let him. I stopped needing my family to tell the truth about me the day I realized I didn't need them to tell me anything at all. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. If, given the chance, I'd do it differently, be gentler, be smaller, keep the peace. No, the peace they offered me was never peace. It was just a quieter version of the same old verdict. The one handed down at the dinner table when I was 11. The one that said I was the disappointment, the difficult one, the girl who didn't understand money and never would. I understood it perfectly. I just waited until they were ready to find out. For most of my life, I measured myself with a ruler my family handed me, and that ruler only had one mark on it: disappointment. It took me 31 years to understand that the ruler was broken and that I was allowed to throw it away. When I look back at what happened in that conference room with Travis, I don't see luck. I see cause and effect, the slow, quiet kind that nobody films. My brother didn't lose the company in a single morning. He lost it every time he chose the jet over the engineers, every time he fired someone for telling him the truth, every time he assumed the rules of math would bend for a man with the right last name. And I didn't win it in a single morning either. I won it during 1,014-hour days and accounting lectures at 8 after waiting tables until 2, in every loan document I read line by line while other people skimmed. What looked like a stunning reversal to that room was really just 2 decades of small choices finally showing their bill. That's the part I want you to take with you. The choices you make when nobody's watching are the only ones that ever really count. If I learned anything worth passing on, it's that 3 things carried me, and not one of them was talent. The first was refusing to become the thing that hurt me. I could have liquidated the company and left my brother with nothing but a smoking crater, and it would have been legal, and it would have felt good for about a week. I didn't, because becoming my father in order to beat my father is not a victory, it's just a slower defeat. Hold on to your decency even when cruelty is the easier currency. It costs more, and it's worth more. The second was learning the actual machinery of the thing they said I'd never understand. They laughed at me for studying money, so I studied it until I knew it better than any of them. Knowledge isn't arrogance, quiet competence, the kind you build patiently while people underestimate you, becomes a power they can never argue with, because facts don't care who's loud. And the third was simply not quitting when quitting made perfect sense. After the funeral, after the will, after my mother told me smart girls end up alone, the reasonable thing would have been to shrink. I didn't. I just kept going, one boring, stubborn day at a time, and stubbornness compounds the same way debt does. So if you're the quiet one at the table right now, the disappointment, the one they talk over, hear me. Don't waste your years auditioning for people who've already decided not to see you. Stay good. Get sharp. Keep going. Then let the math do what it always does. I waited until they were ready to find out who I was. The truth is, I'm the one who finally found out first.